All right, let's broaden out the conversation with NBC News Pentagon correspondent Hans Nichols, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, now Chief International Security and Diplomacy Analyst for NBC News and MSNBC, retired four-star Navy Admiral James Stavridis. And here on set with us, the founder and CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, retired Army First Lieutenant who served in Iraq, Paul Rykoff. Guys, good morning. Great to have you all with us. Paul, let me start with you. We broke into the show yesterday with the news that three more Americans, three service members, had died in an IED attack in Afghanistan, south of Kabul. People forget about this war. It's been going on for 17 years. We're up to more than 2,400 American deaths in Afghanistan. How do you keep this front and center in people's minds as Americans continue to die?
Well, I think you're doing it right now, but it doesn't look like Washington's doing it today. You went through the list of everything they're covering in Washington today. Afghanistan's not on that list. It wasn't really a priority in the congressional midterms. Our community started to call it Forgotistan. There was a young Army Ranger, 25 years old, killed over the weekend, the holiday weekend. He was on multiple tours over there. And I think our troops really feel like they're forgotten. They're overseas, especially around holiday time. And it's on the president. The commander-in-chief's got to connect with them. That's why I've said I think it's important for him to visit them in some just to show that we've got the support of the American people and to bring awareness to their issues, their plight, and their families that are back home with open seats at their holiday tables in the next couple of months.
Yeah, the president said in that interview with the Washington Post yesterday that he will get to the troops in the war zone in good time without any specifics behind it. Yeah. Hans Nichols, let me ask you, the president also said in that interview with the Washington Post yesterday that experts are telling him he needs to stay in Afghanistan, basically putting the onus on other people telling him we need to be there. Is there any movement? Is there any thought inside the Pentagon that there may be time to bring home those 14,000 troops?
Not really, because when you look at the number of casualties that the Afghans are suffering, they're so much higher than the U.S. casualties, right? So the Afghans are suffering about 20 deaths a day. That comes from the president. The U.S. number this year is 12 on the year. And I think the general view is here, you need to force the Taliban to the negotiating table. And that's been part of the key, this new strategy that President Trump ultimately accepted. But when you listen to him talk, it seems like he is the most skeptical person of his own strategy. Now, for the first time, when he was talking to troops, he did say over Thanksgiving that you're winning and we're winning and so much progress has been made. That's really the first time we've heard the president talk about Afghanistan in over a year, and he seemed to be endorsing his own strategy. What we heard from him in the Washington Post interview remind me of that initial raid that went bad at the early days of the Trump presidency in Yemen. Remember Ryan Owen, the Navy SEAL that they lost? And the president said, the generals, they lost Ryan. He seems to be buying an insurance policy and putting some distance between himself and his own strategy. Willie?
Admiral Stavridis, let me ask you, we just referenced the death over the weekend of a 25-year-old member of the United States Army in Afghanistan, multiple deployments, as Paul Rykoff just pointed out. He was 8 years of age when that war in Afghanistan began. We just talked about Iraq and Afghanistan. We just mentioned our role in the war in Yemen. We mention it now on television and in the newspapers as if resolutions about Yemen or Afghanistan or Iraq are part of a highway bill, because we've become so used to the word war in this country, a country where less than 1% serve in these wars. You know about Afghanistan, you know about Iraq from your role in NATO and your role personally as a member of the United States military. What are we doing?
Well, on this one, Mike, I'm with Jim Mattis, which is it's time to end this war in Afghanistan. And I think we can do this. Two data points here. One is we are 90% less in the number of troops in Afghanistan. When I commanded that mission, I had 150,000 troops under my command. We're down to 14,000. So we are making progress in the sense that the Afghans are taking up the fight. It's absolutely correct that it is time to end that war. There can be a negotiated ending to this thing. All of these insurgencies in the end, Mike, and you know this, conclude with a negotiation. Second point, it's not just the United States. When I was the commander, I signed 1,900 letters of condolence to families who lost their troops under my command in Afghanistan. 900 of those came from European nations. This is an international effort. It is a NATO mission. We need to use NATO effectively here. push the Taliban, get over that last mile, and close this one out. It's time to move on from these wars.
So, Paul, we're talking about the men and women on the battlefield in Afghanistan. You have so admirably given your life to supporting the men and women who come home from those battlefields and what happens to them when they get back home. You talk at IAVA, Big Six, things that we need to take care of and help look after our veterans right now. What should Americans watching this show right now, what should they know about vets that's not being given enough attention?
Well, I think, first off, they should know we're not doing enough. It's really a compact that the American public has with our service members, and we're breaking that over and over again. I mean, right now, as we have this discussion about Afghanistan, the VA is failing to cut GI Bill checks on time to student veterans. Folks who are supposed to get a housing allowance around the holidays because of a technology breakdown, an administrative error, aren't getting paid on time.
So, Paul, can I just stop you real quick? That's been going on for weeks now. Why hasn't it been fixed? Months. Why hasn't it been fixed?
We started testifying about this back in September. Media was covering it. The White House ignored it. The VA secretary didn't solve it. And that's happening right now. We're talking about how to support our troops. And folks who've done the right thing, who are in school here and around the country, aren't getting paid on time. Like, that's shameful and outrageous. And that's just one of the issues on that Big Six. We've got to talk about suicide. We've got to talk about better support for women veterans, reforming the VA. Those are the issues we need focus on, no matter how long we stay in Afghanistan.
But, Paul, we've seen what is being called a camouflage wave. So in this blue wave, there is a record number of folks who've served in the military coming into Congress. Also at the state level, what do you think are among that list, some of the things that are immediately actionable? What can these people do to make a difference today for these veterans?
Well, number one, I hope they can bring some civility. I mean, I've called it the camouflage wave, and it is a bipartisan wave. I think they represent hope, inspiration, kind of a get-it-done kind of attitude, and I think they can hopefully work together across partisan lines like the World War II veterans did, and focus on issues that matter most of all to our community, like cleaning up the VA. Who is running the VA? How is that being done? The new House Veterans Affairs chairman is going to have some subpoena power. Let's dig into it and find out what's really going on at the VA. But then also asking hard questions. They've been on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan. They can push the president, they can push Congress and their colleagues and say, what the hell are we doing over there? I think that can come from a position of authority if they've served them. That's going to be powerful.
Hans, Casey Hunt was just reporting to us about the vote about the war in Yemen that could come later today. What does it actually mean as a practical matter if it passes for the United States not to support the war in Yemen? Does that mean not selling arms to the Saudis, for example? What does it look like?
Well, if it's on the authorization of use of military force, that's really the al-Qaeda mission against al-Qaeda in Yemen. There are two wars in Yemen, right? There's the counterterrorism war, and that was the raid I talked about earlier, where you have teams going in. We don't frankly know how frequently, but when they go bad, when these missions go bad, we find out about them. And then you have the refueling mission, but that ended. 29 days ago, Secretary Mattis said the time for admiring this problem, meaning Yemen, has gone on too long, and he wanted there to be a ceasefire within a month, within 30 days. That is coming up. So there is frustration on the Pentagon side that the war between the Houthis and the regime in Yemen has gone on this long, but they want to maintain their ability to do pinprick strikes and or send teams in to go after al-Qaeda, and there are a lot of al-Qaeda in Yemen. To be clear, most of those al-Qaeda are on the government side, and when you talk to people that know Yemen well, they say it's actually safer from Islamic extremism in the Houthi side. Guys?
Admiral Stavridis, there have been many foreign policy experts. We had former CIA Director John Brennan here not long ago saying this moment with the Khashoggi murder and Saudi Arabia's role in it is a point of leverage for the United States to stop its support of Saudi Arabia in Yemen. Do you think that will happen here?
I do, and just to fill in a little bit more color here, and I've been in the command center in Riyadh, I've seen the level of support that we are providing. It's not only the things Hans mentioned, it's intelligence, precision-guided pieces of that, it's cyber, it's weapons. There's a whole spectrum of support here, and we shouldn't think of it, I don't think, as an on and off, where it's either we're going to be 100% in or we're just going to shut it down. It's a rheostat. We can start dialing this thing back. Dropping the refueling was sort of step one. There's a lot more to go on that dial. We ought to be taking advantage of this, and if that can help end this horrible conflict in Yemen, which is the worst humanitarian crisis globally we've seen since Syria, then that would be the right direction to take, and that is showing our Saudi partners